History has it that the black race has gone through rigors and pain associated with mistreatments from whites who parade the notion of white supremacy, thereby rendering blacks inferior and unfit to enjoy certain privileges, which also include the infringement of their fundamental human rights. In the past, we have heard of top societal figures who went extra miles to prove their staunch support of segregation and white supremacy. One of the historical figures with such a record is Theodore Bilbo, and around him is this video centered. Although he was only 5 feet 2 inches tall, Theodore G. Bilbo, in life as in legend, was a towering figure who stalked across the pages of Mississippi history. As a combative individual, Bilbo made many enemies. He often insulted his political foes and responded to challenges with anger and bitterness. Bilbo faced scandals and controversies throughout his political career, including charges of bribery in 1910 and 1913 and of misappropriation of funds in the 1920s and 1940s. Bilbo described himself as the representative of hard-working ordinary people and denounced the influence of both traditional planter elites and newer corporate elites. He wore a red necktie in reference to charges that he and his supporters were rednecks. He was a strong proponent of maintaining racial segregation and other forms of privilege for white Mississippians. Welcome to yet another interesting video segment. In this video, we are going to be examining Theodore Bilbo, U.S. Senator, known for his staunch support of segregation and white supremacy. Before we continue, do not forget to support our efforts by hitting that like button before you. Share with your family and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to keep the channel growing. Your support means a lot to us. Theodore Gilmore Bilbo, whose name was synonymous with white supremacy, was an American politician who twice served as governor of Mississippi and was later elected as a U.S. Senator. Like many Southern Democrats of his era, Bilbo believed that black people were inferior. He defended segregation and was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, the United States' most notable white supremacist terrorist organization. He also published a pro-segregation work titled Take Your Choice, Separation or Mongrelization. On October 13, 1877, Bilbo was born in the small town of Juniper Grove in Hancock, later called Pearl River County. His parents, Obedience Beatty, née Wallace or Wallace, and James Oliver Bilbo, were of Scotch-Irish descent. James was a farmer and veteran of the Confederate States Army, who rose from poverty during Theodore Bilbo's early years to become vice president of the Poplarville National Bank. Theodore Bilbo obtained a scholarship to attend Peabody Normal College in Nashville, Tennessee, and later attended Vanderbilt University Law School, but did not graduate from either. He also taught school and worked at a drugstore during his legal studies. During his teaching career, Bilbo was accused of being overly familiar with a female student. In 1898, Bilbo married the former Lillian Harrington of Wiggins, who died 2 years later, leaving him with a 1-year-old daughter, Jessie Forrest. He subsequently married Linda Gaddy, with whom he had a son, Theodore Gilmore Bilbo, Jr. Bilbo's political career began in the Progressive era, running for circuit clerk in 1903, though losing to a one-armed Baptist minister and Confederate veteran. He was admitted to the bar in Tennessee in 1906 and began a law practice in Poplarville, Mississippi, the following year. Although he had been admitted to the senior class at Vanderbilt, he left without graduating. He was accused of cheating in academics, but he likely left school for financial reasons. Though these accusations never rose to the level of formal charges, they helped create the perception that Bilbo was profligate and dishonest. In 1908, he won a seat in the Mississippi State Senate, running as an anti-railroad populist and supporter of white supremacy, and served for 4 years. Bilbo had overcome accusations of accepting bribes and won an election for lieutenant governor, a position that he held from 1912 to 1916. In 1916, however, he was elected governor and served until 1920. During this term, he earned accolades for enacting progressive measures such as compulsory school attendance and increased spending on public works projects. He was an unsuccessful candidate for the United States House of Representatives in 1920 and was defeated once again when he ran for governor in 1924. Leaning heavily on racist invective, Bilbo regained the governorship in 1928. He served from 1928 to 1932. During this term, Bilbo caused controversy by attempting to move the University of Mississippi from Oxford to Jackson. He fired many faculty members of Mississippi's colleges and universities and brought the state almost to bankruptcy. In another controversy, he aided Democratic nominee Al Smith in the 1928 presidential election by spreading the story that Republican nominee Herbert Hoover had socialized with a black woman. Mississippi voters, considering whether to maintain their allegiance to the Democratic Party in light of Smith's Catholicism and support for the repeal of Prohibition, largely remained with Smith after Bilbo's appeal to racism. In 1930, under Governor Bilbo, Mississippi introduced a sales tax, the first American state to do so. In 1934, after a campaign in which he made more than 1,000 speeches, characterized by biblical phraseology and highly imaginative language, Bilbo won a seat in the U.S. Senate. There he remained for almost the rest of his life, blocking any attempt at ameliorating racial injustice and advocating the deportation of blacks to Africa in order to preserve racial purity. Being of short stature, with a 5'2" or 1.57 meters height, Bilbo frequently wore bright, flashy clothing to draw attention to himself, and was nicknamed the Man because he tended to refer to himself in the third person. In the Senate, Bilbo maintained his staunch support for segregation and white supremacy. He was also attracted to the ideas of the black separatist movement. Considering it a potentially viable method of maintaining segregation, he proposed resettling the 12 million American blacks in Africa. In his second term, he made anti-black racism a major theme. Regarding economic policy, he moved away from support for the New Deal and increasingly joined the conservative coalition. Opposing Roosevelt, he became isolationist in foreign policy and opposed labor unions. He was the leader in fighting Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Fair Employment Practice Committee and helped kill the nomination of New Dealer Aubrey Willis Williams, a liberal Southerner, to head the Rural Electrification Administration. Elected to the Senate in 1934, Bilbo championed New Deal programs and became an odd bedfellow with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Senator Bilbo's racism became ever more pronounced as he gained seniority inside the Senate. He also remained a force to be reckoned with back home in Mississippi. Bilbo seemed unable to tend to his own interests without interfering in local elections. His senior colleague, Pat Harrison, died of cancer in 1941, and Bilbo had already been re-elected to another 6-year term in 1940. A special election was called to fill the remaining year of Senator Harrison's term, and Bilbo was back home in Mississippi, campaigning hard for Congressman Walt Doxey. Joseph B. Keenan, a close Roosevelt advisor, wrote Bilbo in 1940, congratulating him in his re-election to the Senate. "I was delighted to learn of your splendid victory, assuring 6 years more of a real friend of liberal government." By the end of World War II, however, the tide had begun to turn against Bilbo. Powerful Republican Ohio Senator Robert Taft told Life magazine in March 1946 that Bilbo was a disgrace to the Senate, and even wrote a constituent to reveal that a group of concerned senators had drafted a petition to oust Bilbo by a 2/3 vote, but that they had been stopped short because he would revel in the publicity of a trial. The rise in congressional opprobrium towards Bilbo was accompanied by the growth of black civil rights groups. After the Supreme Court ruled in the 1944 case Smith v. Allwright that all white primaries were unconstitutional, 3 organizations, the Progressive Voters League of Mississippi, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and the Civil Rights Congress, CVC, had made top priorities the entwined goals of registering black voters for Mississippi primaries and ousting Bilbo from the Senate. Bilbo recognized the new power of black activism in the South, and he told a crowd in Yucca in May 1946, "Anyone caught in the act of Negro organizing, communist-supporting, racial antagonizing acts should be horsewhipped, tar and feathered, and chased out of our beloved Southland." He had also abandoned his support of the Roosevelts, calling Franklin Delano Roosevelt's widow, Eleanor Roosevelt, the biggest Negro lover of the nation. Ultimately, about half of the 5,000 black Americans registered to vote in Mississippi voted in the 1946 Democratic Senate primary. There were 350,000 black residents of voting age in the state, many of whom had been barred from registering by literacy tests and outright intimidation. Bilbo won the primary by a margin of 35,000 votes. On primary day, Medgar Evers, celebrating his 21st birthday and recently back from fighting in Europe, attempted to vote in Decatur and was chased from the polls by a large gang of armed white men. Evers' experience at the polls in July 1946 was far from unique. In the months following Bilbo's primary victory, the NAACP and the CVC collected hundreds of affidavits from black Mississippians who had been intimidated and beaten when they attempted to exercise their franchise. Another black veteran, Etoy Fletcher, had unsuccessfully attempted to register in Brandon. After he was denied by the circuit clerk, 4 white men abducted him in a pickup truck, took him to the woods, and beat him with cable wire. The CVC sent a complaint and a bundle of 48 affidavits to the Senate in September 1946. By then, Bilbo had admitted on Meet the Press his ties to the Ku Klux Klan. "No man can leave the Klan. He takes an oath not to do that. Once a Ku Klux, always a Ku Klux," he said. The Ku Klux Klan is a secret hate group in the southern U.S., active for several years after the Civil War, which aimed to suppress the newly acquired rights of black people and to oppose carpetbaggers from the North, and which was responsible for many lawless and violent proceedings. Bilbo's racism was not his only trouble. Back in Washington, just after the Jackson hearings closed, a separate Senate War Investigating Committee looked into a $25,000 slush fund Bilbo received from war contractors in exchange for Bilbo's help in securing them contracts to construct Biloxi's Keesler Army Airfield. Investigators also alleged that Bilbo had cajoled contractors into helping him to build an artificial lake, island, and secondary home, that is, Dream House number 2, on his 3,600-acre plantation. Following his victory in the July Democratic primary, which guaranteed re-election in November, the Senate received a petition from a group of that state's African-American residents protesting the senator's campaign tactics. The petition charged that Bilbo's inflammatory appeals to the white population had stirred up racial tensions, provoked violence, and kept many black citizens away from polling places. Late in 1946, 2 special Senate committees investigated Bilbo's conduct. One looked into his campaign activities. A slim majority of that panel concluded that although he ran a crude and tasteless campaign, he should be seated. A second committee uncovered evidence that he had converted thousands of dollars of campaign contributions to his personal use. Both reports lay before the Senate as it convened in January 1947. In late July 1947, the Senate adjourned for the year without resolving a serious complaint against one of its members. 7 months earlier, facing charges of personal corruption and civil rights violations, Mississippi Democrat Theodore Bilbo presented his credentials for a new Senate term. Idaho Democrat Glenn Taylor immediately demanded that the Senate delay Bilbo's swearing in until it could review the recently received findings of 2 special investigating committees. Angry at Taylor's action, several of Bilbo's Southern colleagues launched a filibuster, which threatened to block the Senate's efforts to organize for the new Congress. They argued that the Mississippi senator should be allowed to take his seat while the Senate looked into the matter. A day later, on January 4th, Senate Democratic leader Alben Barkley temporarily broke the impasse by announcing that Bilbo was returning to Mississippi for cancer surgery and would not insist on being sworn in until he had recovered and returned to Washington. Bilbo was in New Orleans as the end of his life approached, a patient at what would eventually become the Ushner Medical Center. Standing by his bedside were his 2 children, whom he knew none too well. Bilbo had undergone surgery to remove a blood clot that was interfering with his breathing. Evidently, the embolism grew, and the man breathed his last on August 21, 1947. His lifeless body lay untouched until it was removed by a black orderly. Although his death ended the Senate's predicament over his seating, it marked only the beginning of an extended post-war struggle to protect the voting rights of all Americans. He was buried at Juniper Grove Cemetery in Poplarville. By the time he died, without taking his seat, the national media had made him the symbol of racism. Despite all the revelations about Bilbo's unscrupulous nature, his funeral attracted more than 5,000 mourners and most of Mississippi's political elite. There was even a bronze statue of Bilbo erected in the state capitol in Jackson. It depicted the Mississippian with his arms raised, and many members of the legislature use those arms today to hang their coats. In his lifetime, Bilbo wrote a controversial book with the title, Take Your Choice, Separation or Mongrelization, which was first published in 1947. In this book, Bilbo argues that the United States is facing a crisis of racial purity and that the only way to preserve the white race is through strict segregation and the prevention of interracial marriage. He asserts that the mixing of races will lead to the downfall of civilization and the degradation of the white race. The book is filled with racist and inflammatory language that has been widely criticized. Bilbo was a segregationist and white supremacist who served as a U.S. Senator from Mississippi. Despite the book's controversial nature, it has been cited by some as an example of the extreme racism that existed in the United States during the mid-20th century. For years after the death of Bilbo, his statue was erected as a monumental statue, but had been associated with mixed reactions from people and even became controversial. The bronze statue of Bilbo stood prominently at the center of the state capitol for decades. After the building underwent extensive renovations in the 1980s, The statue was moved to a first-floor committee room, a move praised by black lawmakers who say he never deserved a place of prominence. Democratic Rep. Kabir Karyem, a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, said its lingering presence was very offensive in a state where nearly 40% of residents are black. In the summer of 2020, Mississippi legislators voted to retire the last state flag in the U.S. that prominently featured the Confederate battle emblem. Months later, voters approved a new Mississippi flag without Confederate imagery. Another member of the Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus, Democratic Representative Ed Blackmon of Canton, said that when he was first elected to the House in 1979, the Bilbo statue was still in the rotunda. "That's the first person I met when I came to the Capitol," I said. "My God, Bilbo," Blackmon said. The Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus often meets in the room where the Bilbo statue stood. "I really looked at it the same way I looked at the flag," Blackmon said. "It was a symbol of this state's ideas about the inferiority of black people. He used my folk as a stepping stone to higher office." The statue is approximately life-sized at 5 feet 2 inches, 158 centimeters. It was not a revered art piece. People sometimes hung their coats or purses on its outstretched arm. House Speaker Philip Gunn said he was unaware the statue had been moved until someone asked him about it. He said he does not know where it is. "I have not verified anything," Republican Gunn said. "We'll look into it and see." Following people's incessant inquiries about the disappearance of the statue of former racist governor Theodore Bilbo, which was on display for decades, first in the center of the Capitol, and since the 1980s in a House committee room. The clerk in the Mississippi House of Representatives, Andrew Ketching, said he unilaterally made the decision to take the statue of a racist former governor, Theodore Bilbo, off public display and put it into storage. "It was purely my decision, 100%, Ketchings told the Associated Press in Mississippi. As clerk, Ketchings had the power to authorize paint jobs, new carpet, and other maintenance for spaces used by the State House of Representatives. He said a work crew moved the Bilbo statue on a Saturday in October at a cost of about $4,000 to $5,000, paid by public money. It is now covered by a fireproof blanket in a closet behind one of the Capitol elevators." Ketching said he had been bothered by the statue for years because of everything he stood for. "It was way past time to do it. I just read through a lot of his quotes that were offensive," said Ketchings, who was a Republican Mississippi House member from 1996 to 2004. The Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus often meets in the room where the Bilbo statue was last on display, and black lawmakers in the past have asked for the statue to be moved. In conclusion, Theodore Gilmore Bilbo's legacy of hatred has overshadowed his unwavering support for the less fortunate in society. Clearly talented and blessed with a magnificent ability to speak, Theodore Bilbo frittered away his talent by using his talents to promote himself and denigrate other human beings. Bilbo became the caricature of a Southern demagogue and used his office for himself and evil rather than good. While figures like Theodore Bilbo represent a dark stain on American history, their existence serves as a potent reminder of the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. By acknowledging and grappling with these historical figures and their harmful ideologies, we can foster critical thinking, engage in open dialogue, and work towards a future free from discrimination and prejudice. Instead of simply condemning Bilbo, let us use his legacy as a springboard for education and action. Let us explore the root causes of such ideologies, understand the devastating impact they have on individuals and communities, and identify the systemic issues that perpetuate them. Through open discourse, critical reflection, and a commitment to dismantling these harmful structures, we can strive to build a more just and equitable society for all. This brings us to the end of this video segment. Did you happen to learn a thing or two? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. We are always delighted to pick from your thoughts. Also support our works by hitting that like button in front of you. Share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative. And kindly subscribe to help in building the rising membership of this channel. Your support means a great deal to us. Thank you for watching.